The clerk will close the roll and tally the vote. Ayes 74, no 0. Senate amendments are concurred in with immediate transmittal to the governor. Members, moving to third reading, we are moving to file item 19, that is H.R. 11. File item 19, H.R. 11, clerk will read.
House Resolution 11 by Eduardo Garcia relative to Cesar Chavez Day.
Mr. Eduardo Garcia, you may open.
Good morning, members. I rise today in commemoration of Cesar Chavez. H.R. 11 calls upon all Californians to observe Cesar Chavez's birthday, March 31st, as a day of public service. It honors and commemorates the contributions and legacy of Cesar Chavez. Although the great American hero, Cesar Chavez, is no longer physically present, his spirit remains alive and well, and remnants of his life, work, and values still stand strong. This is true in communities in Imperial Valley, Coachella Valley, and throughout California, where we all have the privilege to serve and represent the people. Cesar Chavez organized early on in his career, and many battles were fought to improve the conditions of most vulnerable populations of California, our farm workers. Martin Luther King, Philip Vera Cruz, Dolores Huerta, Rosa Parks, Dorothy Day, Mohandas Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Oscar Romero are just a few names of people who were activists and who understood that the aspirations and needs of others, particularly the basic needs of the most vulnerable in our society, are equally important, if not more important, than one's own desires and self-interest. H.R. 11 celebrates Cesar Chavez's life and his mission of nonviolence, social justice, and selfless service to others. And while Cesar Chavez left behind a vigorous and lasting legacy in my district, Imperial Valley and the Coachella Valley, we have one of the first schools that was named after Cesar Chavez while he was alive. In fact, we had the privilege of having Cesar Chavez there in 1992 to open this particular school. Typically, people like to discuss the specifics of what Cesar Chavez did for our farm workers. But in the spirit of this resolution, I would like to focus on how Cesar Chavez brought together communities across California, on how Cesar Chavez dedicated his life to service and advocacy for others. This leads me to a quote that comes from Mr. Cesar Chavez: "You are never strong enough that you don't need help." Cesar Chavez was a man that truly connected a wide array of communities from California. He understood that he would never be able to accomplish anything unless he brought communities together to fight for their rights. Not many people know this, but Cesar Chavez, as a farm worker child, attended 38 different schools before graduating in the 8th grade. This was because of the constant migrating that his family undertook in order to find a good place to live and a decent and respectable job to provide for their family. After moving to California in 1938, he had lived and worked in Oxnard, San Jose, Brawley, Atascadero, Gonzales, King City, Salinas, McFarland, Delano, Wasco, Selma, Kingsburg, and Mendota. With a range covering southern, central, and some parts of northern California, there are a few areas of California Chavez did not reach. While working conditions were hard, these conditions did not break the soul of Cesar Chavez, but rather provided the necessary commitment that would soon become a roaring fire of activism and altruism. It was this same migratory experience that would one day allow him to reconnect with communities he once worked in and help them work for a better future. For instance, the Filipino community and leaders such as Philip Vera Cruz, Larry Itlong, Pete Velasco were the strongest allies for Cesar Chavez And without their support, many of the initial stages of farm worker rights would not have occurred. Now, I need to highlight this. The Filipino community throughout the United Farm Worker Movement perhaps has not been recognized in many instances as it should. The Filipino community had a major impact in the Coachella communities to making sure that in 1965, the first strike, the first walkout would take place. It was the Filipino community that motivated the women in that community who were the first to step forward and boycott their working conditions. So I wanted to make sure that we highlighted that in the leadership of our brothers and sisters in the Filipino community. As many of you know, Coachella and Imperial Valley grows a great portion of the state's nation food supply. In fact, many people that I personally know had the honor of participating in many of the strikes and the marches with Cesar Chavez and Mr. Philip Vera Cruz. Because so many were directly involved, there is a tremendous and vigorous legacy rooted deep within the Coachella Valley and Imperial counties. This sense of community and belonging is the strong basis of why his spirit lives on today, not only in our region, but throughout California. I want to say that, members, we represent this beautiful state of California. I think that if Cesar Chavez was here today, he would say to us that we need to listen more than mandate, that we need to abstain more than indulge, and to sacrifice more than serve ourselves. It is our responsibility to the people who sent us here. We owe it to California, we owe it to the people that we represent in our district, and we owe it to an American hero, his legacy and his commitment, Cesar Estrada Chavez. I'd like to just close
Garcia, if you could
by saying that there was a group of women who were involved in the United Farm Worker Movement. It was Dolores Huerta and his wife, Helen Chavez. Without those two individuals, the United Farm Worker Movement would not have been as successful as it was. And so, as we celebrate and commemorate Women's History Month, we need to keep in mind how important and powerful and influential the work of those women was for this movement. So with that, I close, and I ask that we open the roll for co-authors.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. Mr. Bonta, you are recognized.
Thank you, Assemblymember Garcia and the Latino Caucus for presenting H.R. 11 today to celebrate the legacy of Cesar Chavez, a transformative figure in our state, national, and global landscapes. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to say a few words on behalf of the API Caucus. My early childhood was spent in the United Farm Workers headquarters of La Paz, living in a trailer with my family just a few hundred yards from the home of Cesar Chavez. Watching my parents work alongside the leadership of the UFW, organizing farm workers, and experiencing firsthand one of the greatest peaceful, social, racial, and economic justice movements of all time. Chavez worked side by side with great Filipino leaders, including Philip Vera Cruz, Larry Itliong, Andy Imutan, and Pete Velasco, and a coalition of other leaders representing the beautiful diversity of our state, fighting for the rights of working people in America, and sparking a heroic struggle for justice. This collaboration made the California labor movement a tremendous success. So today, let us celebrate the beauty of Cesar Chavez that is found in his commitment to collaboration across different races and cultures. And I would be remiss not to mention that my ninong, or godfather, was Mr. Chavez's executive assistant, Jose Gomez. I feel lucky that my family was part of this movement and that I had the unique opportunity to be personally touched by the passion, leadership, and courage of Cesar Chavez. Si se puede, and in Tagalog, kaya natin.
Thank you, Mr. Bonta. Ms. Burke, you are recognized from your desk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. On behalf of the California Legislative Black Caucus, I rise in strong support of H.R. 11. For all of our caucuses, our struggles for equality have been intertwined for decades. In 1966, Dr. Martin Luther King sent a telegram to Cesar Chavez with words of encouragement and solidarity. In the telegram, he wrote, "As brothers in the fight for equality, I extend the hand of fellowship and goodwill and wish continued success to you and your members. You and your valiant fellow workers have demonstrated your commitment to righting grievous wrongs forced upon exploited people. We are together with you in spirit and in determination that our dreams for a better tomorrow will be realized." Those profound words still ring true today as we stand together on the floor with renewed determination that our dreams for a better tomorrow for all Californians will be realized. I urge an aye vote on H.R. 11.
Thank you, Ms. Burke. Ms. Garcia, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This morning I rise on behalf of the Legislative Women's Caucus to acknowledge the work of Cesar Chavez and to honor his legacy on behalf of workers' rights. From an early age, Cesar Chavez's mother, Juana, a deeply religious and compassionate woman, emphasized the importance of caring for the less fortunate and the power of love. This shaped his early beginnings and the path he would walk for a lifetime. Along his path, he married his high school sweetheart, Ellen Chavez. The relationship and the support that Ellen would give him throughout his life provided Chavez with a solid base that allowed him to devote his life to helping others. And in 1962, Chavez partnered with another impactful and insightful woman when he co-founded the National Farm Workers Association, later United Farm Workers with Dolores Huerta. Their work together is truly what we celebrate today. But the fight is not over. When women in all walks of life do not share in equal pay for equal work, and specifically when Latinas in California have the largest pay gap of all 50 states, we must march on and demand that all workers are treated fairly and paid equitably. In doing so, we truly honor Cesar Chavez's memory and help expand on the great body of work he dedicated his life to. Thank you, and I urge support of H.R. 11.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. Mr. Levine, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise on behalf of the Jewish Caucus in support of H.R. 11 and thank the author for bringing forward this important resolution. Cesar Chavez's fight for fair working conditions, equality, and justice for farm workers must be celebrated. This resolution reminds us all of his life's work, sacrifice, and tremendous effort. During the great boycotts of the 60s and 70s, rabbis and synagogue members joined the just cause of Cesar Chavez and the UFW. In the tradition of our faith, Jewish leaders found new meaning for the kosher laws by using those laws to fully participate in the UFW Great Boycott. In 1969, the Union of American Hebrew Congregations adopted a resolution in support of the boycott. That resolution stated, "These grape pickers, among the poorest working people in our land of plenty, have appealed to the conscience of the country to support in their desperate struggle to secure a collective bargaining agreement with the growers of table grapes. We cannot stay indifferent to their appeal, nor to the right of other farm workers to a fair share of the fruit of their labor. We all stand together in these fights, or one by one we will all fall." Thank you.
Mr. Hernandez, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. As chair of the Assembly Committee on Labor and Employment, I rise in strong support of H.R. 11 and the legacy of Cesar Chavez. It is important that we recognize the contribution of Cesar Chavez to the labor movement and the cause of collective bargaining, particularly for agricultural workers who had traditionally been excluded from labor laws such as the National Labor Relations Act. In 1962, Chavez, joined by Dolores Huerta, founded the National Farm Workers Association, later to become the United Farm Workers. His tireless leadership included the Delano grape strike, his personal fasts that focused national attention on the plight of farm workers, and the 340-mile march from Delano to Sacramento in 1966 were pivotal movements in the struggle for farm worker labor rights. And in 1975, his work culminated in the passage of the Agricultural Labor Rights Act here in California, the first law in the nation to extend collective bargaining rights to the agricultural employees. He dedicated his life and passion for workers and workers' rights until the very end, when he passed away in his sleep on April 23, 1993, near Yuma, Arizona, where he was assisting United Farm Workers attorneys in a lawsuit. Cesar gave his last ounce of strength defending farm workers. His legacy to the labor movement and the cause of collective bargaining is virtually without parallel. For all these reasons, and on behalf of working Californians across the state in every industry, I rise in strong support of this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. Ms. Eggman, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I rise today as a chair of the LGBT caucus in strong support of H.R. 11. Cesar Chavez and our first elected LGBT person, Harvey Milk, worked strongly together. Cesar Chavez was one of the people who, in the early days, when it was not popular to stand with the LGBT community, was the one who said, we can't fight for equality for ourselves if we tolerate discrimination against others. He spoke with us at the Democratic Convention in 1984 and then followed up with a march on Washington with us in 1987. He's been a strong leader, strongly recognized, and again, one of the first people who recognized that coalition building and finding ways that we all come together to stand for the good of the whole is more important than finding ways to divide each other. We speak in strong support today of H.R. 11, and let his words ring true in our hearts today.
Thank you, Ms. Eggman. Ms. Lopez, you are recognized.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today in support of H.R. 11. As we honor Cesar Chavez next week, we must remember that policymakers, we must continue working to start the standing up for who are in fairly need. I feel connected with him because his legacy of advocacy for education, civil rights, and was a true voice of the people. We should honor Cesar Chavez by continuing to be a voice for justice and make sure all families are treated with dignity and respect. Necesitamos más gente como el señor Cesar Chavez.
Thank you, Ms. Lopez. Mr. Alejo, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and colleagues. I rise as this day is more than just celebrating the legacy of Cesar Chavez. For many of us who are grandchildren and children of migrant farm workers, this day represents the reflection of the sacrifice, the hard work, the labor that our parents and grandparents did in joining this farm worker rights movement to provide a better future for the children and grandchildren of migrant farm workers in California and across the country. My grandfather first came to work as a single worker during the Bracero program, a time in the 1940s where they were interning hundreds of thousands of Japanese Americans, and there was a void of a lack of labor, and so he brought in millions of Mexican workers during that program, and he later brought his family to work first in the Rio Grande Valley, picking cotton in southern Texas, then they came to the Salinas Valley, picking lettuce, working in the orchards in Gilroy, picking table grapes in Del Rey, and then eventually strawberries in Watsonville. It was in 1965 that my grandfather first came to Watsonville, and it was a Japanese-American farmer that gave him his first job and also included rental to cover housing for our entire family. And later, he taught my grandfather to be his own sharecropper, selling strawberries to Driscoll's. My grandfather described this man, Roy Takamune, as the best man he ever met in his entire life. And it was only a few years after that, in 1970, when Cesar Chavez and the farm worker rights movement came to Watsonville and Salinas, my grandparents were the first to join, the first out of 5 families in Watsonville. And so as a young child, I would remember marching with my grandfather, marches all over the state of California, fighting for the rights of farm workers. Because even though he came to this country and he only went to the 3rd grade, my grandmother never went to school at all. They came with a dream to provide something better for themselves and their family, but also they had a consciousness that it wasn't enough to think about themselves. They also had to think about their fellow farm workers and fighting for justice for everyone else across the state of California. Because the work was hard, the conditions were hard, but they had a vision for providing something better. But my grandfather would say, education is important, not only to improve our own lives. He taught us that it was more important to use our education to improve the lives of others. So in 1971, there's a photo that I just posted on social media. My Aunt Irma and my grandfather are outside on the west side of this Capitol, fighting for the first labor rights in the state of California for farm workers. 2 generations later, I'm able to attend the most prestigious universities and now be inside the Capitol and passing laws that help farm workers and setting the example for the rest of the nation, whether it's raising the minimum wage to $10 an hour or providing driver's license for undocumented immigrants all over the state. But when we talk about the farm worker rights movement, it's more than just a story about the Latino community. It's truly a reflection of the rich fabric of diversity all over the state of California. Many do not know that the first person who was killed on the picket line was Naji Daifullah, an Arab-American Yemenese farm worker. The general counsel was a Jewish-American lawyer named Jerry Cohen, and the most prolific organizer was Marshall Gans. And of course, as I put on the commemoration cards this year, it was the Filipino workers who went out on strike first on September 8, 1965. And 8 days later, knowing that if they didn't unite with the Mexican workers, their strike might be defeated, Larry Leon convinced Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta to join in. And when the vote was taken, it was unanimous on September 16, 1965, to join the Filipino workers in that strike. So for me, this day is a very special one. And today we talk about the many stories who are not often included, including the story of a great Filipino leader like Philip Vera Cruz, who we will honor later today. He was honorably discharged from the U.S. Army and was an active union member who advocated for giving farm workers a voice. He helped found AWOC with Larry Itliong and eventually served as the vice president of the United Farm Workers till his retirement in 1977. But it's this unity, this multicultural unity of agricultural workers and the leadership of great Filipino leaders that speaks to the pivotal role of Mexican and Filipino workers that they play championing for farm worker rights in our fields across California. It's the farm workers' dream of providing a better life for their families, and that still continues to this day. I respectfully ask for an aye vote on this important measure.
Thank you, Mr. Alejo. Seeing no further discussion or debate, Mr. Garcia, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I may have used much of my time. At this time, I just respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. With that, the clerk will open the roll. This is for co-authors, members. This is for co-authors. All members vote who wish to vote. This is to add as co-authors on H.R. 11. There are 66 co-authors added to H.R. 11. Without objection, we may take a voice vote on this item. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. The ayes have it. House resolution is adopted. Moving back to our author for your guest introduction related to the resolution, Mr. Eduardo Garcia, you are recognized for your guest introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the great honor and privilege to introduce a very special person, Becky Chavez. Becky Chavez is here. She is the daughter of Richard Chavez, Cesar's youngest brother. As a young girl in Delano, she witnessed her father, her uncle, and others build the United Farm Workers movement. It was in her childhood home that her father and brother designed the Black Eagle insignia, which became the symbol of the United Farm Workers. When the Delano grape strike began 50 years ago, this coming September, the extended Chavez family endured many adversities and sacrifices. Becky, her siblings, and cousins grew up on the picket lines in the fields and outside boycotted supermarkets, surviving on donated food and clothing. But like everyone who sacrificed everything during those historic times, Becky helped build was the first enduring effort to bring rights and justice for farm workers. For the past 30 years in Sacramento, she's been a local preschool teacher and continues the legacy of teaching toddlers and young people about farm workers, their struggles, and the work of her uncle Cesar Chavez. As we honor Cesar Chavez Day and the continued fight for economic justice for all, it is appropriate to honor those who helped launch and lead the movement. Members, please join me in welcoming Ms. Becky Chavez to the Assembly floor.
Mr. Alejo, you are recognized for your guest introduction.
Members, we have one more very special guest. 2 years ago, we were very honored to give a recognition to the family of Larry Leong, and his son John Leong came to receive a recognition. Today I rise to honor one of the great other Filipino leaders who, for the very first time in the history of this floor, we are honoring the legendary Philip Vera Cruz. And here to receive his recognition is his nephew, Dr. Fernando Gapasin. Dr. Gapasin has been a union and labor movement activist for over 50 years, and he is a labor educator and author. For the past 12 years, he has organized workers in both the private and public sector in the state of Oregon. As the chair of the Latino caucus, I want to pay tribute personally pay tribute to Philip Veracruz and the important role that Filipino farm workers played in supporting the farm worker rights movement along with Cesar Chavez. Specifically, I want to recognize Philip Veracruz for his efforts across the world, because after he retired from the UFW, Philip became an international face for democracy in the Philippines. He was a spokesman for democracy, civil rights, and anti-racism. Philip Veracruz is a legend in the UFW movement and was an influential catalyst for social change. Thank you, Dr. Capacin, for representing Philip Veracruz here today and all the great work he did throughout his life. Muchas gracias and mabuhay.
Members, continuing with guest introductions, Mr. Nazarian, you had some students in the gallery earlier today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to take a moment, first of all, just to reflect the wonderful work that we are privileged to have the opportunity of conducting ourselves here. During any given day, we vote and debate issues having to do with water, to recognizing wonderful leaders who shaped and offered the values that we build upon today when it comes to our workforce. And so, amidst that work, it's amazing to be visited and be viewed upon by many different students from throughout our wonderful state. I had a group of students from the Adat Ariel School, which belongs to the oldest congregation of the first synagogue that was established in the San Fernando Valley, who were here with us, but about half an hour ago, they needed to leave and go on a tour. So thank you for the opportunity of having them come and see our work, and all the other students here that are here from other schools. Thanks for being here.
Mr. Cooper, you are recognized from my desk on the floor of the Assembly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to recognize a group of 20 government students from Elk Grove and their parents and teachers. They're a government class from Elizabeth Pinkerton Middle School, my hometown. Welcome.
Mr. Hernandez, you are recognized for your guest introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. It is my pleasure to welcome a delegation from Dell Records to the floor today. Dell Records is based in Assemblymember Garcia's Assembly District in the city of Downey, but their sound is heard throughout Southern California and Mexico. Dell Records is home to international musicians, including the late singer and songwriter Ariel Camacho, whose family joins us here today. With us in attendance are Angel Del Villar, owner, founder, and CEO of Dell Records, and Brian Gutierrez, Executive Vice President of External Affairs from Dell Records. In addition, the family of the late Ariel Camacho is joining us, including his father Benito, his mother Reynalda, and his sisters Kenya and Cynthia. Members, please join me in welcoming the Dell Records delegation to the Assembly floor.